Many businesses looking to deploy AI are still concerned about errors and hallucinations, but are their fears justified? On this episode of Today in Tech, we're going to talk about whether hallucinations can be good for a company and whether businesses are getting skeptical about errors. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Joining me on the show today is Ryan Welsh. He is the field CTO for generative AI at Qlik. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Pleasure to be here. Excited to talk about this important topic.
So what I've been seeing lately is that there hasn't been a lot of high-profile news, probably within the last 3 or 4 weeks, around AI hallucinations and AI errors. We have seen a lot in the last year and a half, obviously, as generative AI has come out. But when you look at the space, how do you break down the market when it comes to the level of concerns that either companies or your clients have about hallucinations and errors, and are they the same thing, or can they be broken down that way as well? Because not all hallucinations are equal, right?
Yes, exactly. So we sell software to businesses, and businesses are incredibly concerned about hallucinations. It's okay if you're on a weekend mucking around with ChatGPT as a consumer and it gets something wrong. As a business, when your employees get knowingly false information or your customers get knowingly false information,
right?
That's not okay. And so it is top of mind for every executive that I speak with at businesses today.
Is it basically because they don't want to be the company that's in the headlines? And we're going to discuss some of the incidents that we've seen. Is it just because of that? Or I mean, I guess they're also concerned about accuracy, and as a business, you probably want to be concerned that way.
It's part headlines, but then it's part like actually making business decisions. And so making business decisions with the wrong information leads to loss of money.
Right.
And so it's just those just basic concerns of your systems being right and your people making decisions based on good information.
Okay. So, but the way that I've also heard it described is, there's because AI can give you accurate responses when done correctly, but then it also gives you creative creative capability, like the ones that can, create a poem from text or write song lyrics. And now we're seeing images and audio and video that can be created from a text prompt.
Totally.
So there is a creative side to it. And so there's always that balance. And I think that maybe people don't care about a hallucination. If I ask it to draw a picture of the puppet Alf from the 1980s TV show, and it gets it completely wrong, I've still yet to see one that can do a good version of that. Then I'm like, okay, well, maybe it isn't ready yet, or look what it drew. But I'm obviously, if I need an answer of like historical or a prediction or math, like I want that answer to be correct.
Yeah, it does depend on the use case. So for the creative use cases that you're talking about, hallucinations are a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
And so creating marketing content, creating maybe sales emails where you kind of help the sales development rep come up with some unique email that they can then look at and send on. Like that is absolutely where you want, I'll call it, hallucinations or creativity to kind of like manifest themselves.
Right.
But what you don't want is like knowingly false information. So if I'm, sending an email to a client and it then says that this client graduated with a PhD from Ohio State University and they didn't, they went to Michigan.
Right.
All right.
Oh,
you don't want to like send that email on, particularly with those two universities.
Exactly. So I want to get to the creativity part later because there is a key component that I want to talk about with the creativity, but let's dig into the accuracy side of the equation here. For companies that are looking to become better accurate, what are some of the methods they're using now? I've heard a lot about RAG and taking an LLM, a large language model, and then integrating a company's own data so that they know it's accurate, and then making sure that the system doesn't leak that data. Is that one of the methods, or are there some other things that you're seeing clients doing?
That is one method, and there is like an emerging LLM app stack that is coming into play here. And so first half of 2023, everyone wanted to just buy a large language model. Then they realized all these limitations. And so now there's like an entire ecosystem that's emerging. One of them is, part of that is that contextual enterprise data that you talk about. And so you've seen the rise of vector databases or vector stores or vector search capabilities where you can turn enterprise data into vector, stored in a vector, which is an ideal representation for putting into the large language model. So that's one area where people are starting to ground the large language model in enterprise data. And then there's a lot of tooling that's popping up for checking the answers as they come out of a large language model. And so even if you put grounded enterprise data into a large language model, the large language model still may pull from its generic knowledge from looking at the web to create knowingly false information in response. And so you have to check as the answer comes out. And so there's fact-checking tooling that's popping up. There's guardrails that are popping up. Fact-checking would, as the answer comes out, looking back at a piece of information that is knowingly true, it is actual fact, it is factually correct, to just confirm that the answer that the LLM is generating is correct. Then there may be some guardrails that you want to put in place where it's just kind of like, hey, the LLM can't answer these type of questions or has to answer certain questions in a certain way, and that's just kind of like overriding the LLM system.
Yeah, are these fact checking tools, are they automated as well, or? So those are automated, and there's probably a certain level of still checking that the fact checking has to do, right?
What? Yeah, and then these create this loop of constant fact checking, and so yes, and so. One of the things that we've seen be successful is if you can match some of the output text coming out of a large language model to the underlying contextual enterprise data that you put in. And so if you know that, hey, the substance of this answer being generated from the LLM matches 80% of the substance or 90% of the substance of the input data, okay, this is great. But then if it gets down to 50%, well, maybe 50% of the answer coming out of the LLM is made up. And I would say the challenges with these systems is that then that adds to response times, right? And so LLM response times are notoriously slow given the computational nature of these systems. Mm-hmm. And so if you add another step in of fact checking, that just kind of slows the user experience further. But
right,
kind of is what it is.
And we've had a lot of guests on the show that continually use that term, the term of human in the loop, and making sure that a human is still reviewing these answers. If you're trying to do that in a live, real time kind of chatbot thing, then the whole AI thing, the purpose seems to go out the window, right? Like why would you do that when I've got a human checking the answers anyway? When they say human in the loop, they mean before you deploy something, right? Is that what people are saying?
Yes. It depends on where you're putting the human in the loop. And so there may be aspects of, say, you're creating this, you're creating the knowledge base of facts to then check answers as they come out of the LLM. There's a human in the loop there to create that known knowledge base of facts. But then once it's deployed, that those people aren't there anymore.
Yeah.
But then there's also human in the loop where it's like, hey, the system is, say, a customer support agent as an example. I'm asking a natural language question of that. The response is coming back to me. It's passing through the human before it goes to another human to then convey the answer from the LLM, so that the customer support agent can actually use their expertise and knowledge to actually then communicate that to an end user.
Right. So even if the human in the loop is used to test the system before it deploys, there's still not 100% guarantee that your AI system is not going to burp up something. And I guess that's
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, let me be clear about this. If you had 100% perfect factual data going into an LLM to train the LLM, it will still hallucinate.
Yeah. And
that is the nature of these systems. I mean, these are probabilistic systems. These are kind of like stochastic reconstruction systems. And so if you had the most pristine data on the planet, 100% correct, it'll still hallucinate.
Then do we know why that it's still yes. like this? Like, is it just because of the math? Like someone didn't carry the one?
No. It's because we're trying to generalize language. And so we're trying to create these systems that can generalize across multiple tasks. And in this instance, create human text. And so to do that, you need to have some probabilistic measure of what the next word's going to be. And it has to be a non-zero probability for that next word. And so because we're trying to generalize, we introduce the aspect of potential creativity and going down different paths. And so it's again, depending on the use case, it's a bit feature and bug in some instances, but we're trying to use these large language models for all types of use cases. Whereas historically in machine learning, we would train a very targeted model for a specific use case. Whereas in this case, as I was saying, we're just letting it do all the use cases.
Right. So I want to go through some of the higher profile ones that we've seen lately. And since I've got you on the show here, I want you to answer if what you think may have happened or how it could have been prevented. And if you don't know the answer, just say, I don't know what the actual thing here was. But first of all was the Air Canada chatbot. This came out of a lawsuit where the chatbot was telling the person, I think that the customer was trying to get a bereavement discount for the airline, and the chatbot told them, yes, you can do it, but once you get back. And the policy that the airline had set up was, no, you have to get this before you take the flight. But somehow the chatbot said it was okay. So what do you think went wrong in that case?
This is a good one, because it sounds like the airline put in place some initial steps to prevent hallucinations. And so if I recall correctly, when the answer came back, there was actually a link to the underlying documentation that the person could have looked at to see the real policy. And so they were doing retrieval augmented generation, where they were retrieving the relevant snippets of text or documents, feeding it into a large language model, and having the language model generate the response to the user. But as happens with retrieval augmented generation, sometimes the language model taps into the generic knowledge or general knowledge that it learned from the internet. And that's what happened in this case, where the system now made up a response that was in conflict with the actual policy. And so this is the step where I talk about you have to check the output of the LLM back against the underlying data to make sure that it's not tapping into knowledge. It's that step that seems to have been missing here. Is
it possible in something like this that when they were testing the chatbot, they didn't input a text prompt for the chatbot that was like, hey, what is the bereavement policy of the airline? And so it didn't necessarily know, like the airline didn't know how it was going to respond until it actually was deployed. Could that
so
have been the case?
in a situation like that, an example generic prompt that you're going to put in is, you're a customer support agent. You can only answer the user's question based on the input documentation. So you're trying to constrain the LLM to say, don't tap into my generic knowledge, only use the input text. But even in those instances, sometimes the LLM taps into its generic knowledge. And so you wouldn't have a specific bereavement prompt in there. You would just have here's the question. It was a bereavement question. So you'd add the user's question, and then you'd have a generic prompt that you would use. Again, you're taking on the persona of a customer support agent. You can only answer the user's question based on the input documentation. But even in those instances, they still tap into their general knowledge.
That just made me think of another question. And I'm sorry for the tangent, but why have we not seen AI or chatbots that just basically go, I don't know. Like, you never really see that. Like, I see like, I am unclear, or I don't know the answer. Or like, I'm not allowed to answer that question. That's where you see the guardrails. I don't have enough information. Like, you never actually just see one, I don't know, ask again, or like a magic 8-ball type of a thing where it's like, try again later.
Well, these systems are doing their best to please you.
I know. That's the other thing. They're trying so hard to be your friend.
And they're text generation machines, right? And so like you give it a prompt and it's sitting there going, I need to generate text. And so it's they just really, really want to please you as a user. And we have seen, with good prompts and good input text, we have seen systems just say, again, this is a bit generic language and annoying. The context doesn't provide an answer to that question, right? As opposed to I don't know.
Yeah, like we accept that with humans. If I ask you a question that you don't know, you don't do your best to try to make me happy about the answer. You could just like, well, I don't know, I'm not familiar with that, or
What's funny is you actually respect humans more that say I don't know.
Right.
Right.
That was one of the first things I learned in media training. Was they said to me, don't try to fake anything. If you don't know the answer, just say that's not my area of expertise.
Totally.
And then they go on to the next question. All right. So the second story I want to bring up was the infamous lawyer who submitted a fake legal brief for a lawsuit, and it turns out that the chatbot, this was really early on, that the chatbot had made up a case. And so, is this a little different from what the hallucination was in the Air Canada case?
Yeah, so this is classic definition of hallucination.
Okay.
And so the lawyer was interacting with ChatGPT to create a legal brief. It came back with a bunch of stuff. The lawyer had no idea that LLMs hallucinate. Copy paste, submit to court. And so this is just kind of the classic first case of hallucinations. And then the Air Canada one that we actually just referenced likely was like, oh, well, we learned that you can't just interact with an LLM directly.
Right.
Let's bring in retrieval augmented generation. And so this legal one is just the classic case of an early user getting a hallucination.
And this was a case of the guy just didn't check the work. Like, after it spit out, it was probably just, like you said, a copy paste thing, which we saw from a lot of students as well. They were like, oh, well, this is the answer. And then there was something in the text that you could always tell that it was generated by, an AI, because they would put like, hey, this answer is generated by AI. And students aren't checking.
And you would hope, I mean, maybe not, I'm not a lawyer, but you would hope, like, if the person has experience in the field and this is a case or a certain type of case that he's argued before, like, you'd be like, oh, I've never heard of that case before. But
right, and then you would go look at you would want to go look it up, or at least try to figure out what case is he saying here.
Exactly.
Right. And then the third one was there was someone who bought a car for $1 through a chatbot car dealership. Now, I don't know if this was actually, I read the story, this was a while ago, and I don't know if they actually honored the dollar purchase, or if they were trying to, it was like a media site that was trying to test the chatbot, and then they got responses for.
This is a classic jailbreak.
Yeah.
So this is a classic jailbreak where the LLMs are a bit gullible. And so, as I understand it, there was someone mucking around with the chatbot, saw that it said, "Hey, this is powered by ChatGPT or one of the large language models out there." Then knew right away, "Oh, I can mess around with this thing," and then posted online, and then a lot of people started messing around with it. And so, in this instance, someone's saying, "Hey, you LLM are taking on the persona of this. Your response must be this," and you can actually start to trick these LLMs into kind of staying within those confines that you put them in, or the personas that you put them in, or their responses. And so in this instance, I think the person said, like, your response has to be, $1 and no takesy back, and that's a no takesy backsies or something like that, which is just hilarious, prompt. But this is the case of users doing what's called a jailbreak, where you actually kind of manipulate the LLM to give you specific responses.
Right. And that's another
likely is. And
that's another thing that companies need to be aware about and be ready for if they're trying to deploy an AI, is that there's, with an understanding that humans being humans, will do whatever they can to try to break your system, whether it's a security thing or whether it's just to try to get your chatbot to say something goofy or give them a deal for a car for $1. So
exactly.
So that's another part of the pre-testing that needs to happen, right?
Yeah, pre-testing, you're never going to get all of these cases. And so ideally you can capture a bunch of cases where you want to not allow the large language model to respond. So like in this instance, could you put guardrails in place where it's like, anytime someone tries to purchase a car, you can't purchase a car via the chatbot.
Right.
And so just anytime someone says, I'm going to buy, make me an offer to purchase this car for X, boom, it gets triggered, like in the sense of like, hey, I'm not allowed to come to an agreement and sit and sell a car online, please call the office or something like that.
Right.
And so ideally you can kind of come up with these, cases where these are the high impact cases that if you got them wrong could ruin your business or, have a significant loss, where you put guardrails in place to then stop that from happening and then being diverted to a human being.
Is that going to be one of those wave of new jobs that people will have at a company? Is similar to penetration testing for security companies? You're going to be like,
yes.
Should I change if I'm really good at this, I should be, like, hey, hire me as a person that I'll come up with the crazy ass jailbreak scenarios. Maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of companies popping up
that do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Whether it's like prompt injections or jailbreaking. So there's a lot of tooling that's popping up. There's a lot of companies getting funded here in Silicon Valley for this exact style of stuff. And what the OpenAIs and other large language model vendors of the world would say is, do we just steamroll those companies because these models are going to get better and better and better anyway? And so they could be temporary companies. But as these large language models evolve, ideally they can be, manipulated less.
Right.
And so these companies won't exist. That's an ongoing debate here in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, there's another bunch of news that came out recently around this concept of the whole garbage in, garbage out phrase that a lot of IT programmers and coders have known for years. But we're starting to see stories around the amount of data that a generative AI system needs or the LLM needs. It's gotten so large that all of the data that we've actually produced on the internet, at least all the legal ones, there's still copyright issues around that, but is not enough. Like this data isn't enough. And so then we start seeing companies that can generate artificial data for the use of some of these AI projects. But that always feels to me like it's a garbage in, garbage out. If you start adding generative AI stuff or artificially produced data into your data set, that's just going to start. It's like making a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. At some point,
agree.
yeah. And so it's funny because I always tell people too that if you want to destroy not destroy, but if you want to break an AI, start putting out gibberish on the internet, whether it's a Reddit post or just, write a blog and have everything be wrong in it. And then, see if it gets picked up by the AI. And I'm not sure that's a one person job, but is this idea of garbage in, garbage out something that will produce more errors down the line?
Garbage in, garbage out still holds.
Yeah.
And what is really interesting from a research perspective in large language models lately is how much people are really starting to understand the quality of the content. And so the company Mistral out of France, I would say one of their big contributions to large language model creation was to remind everyone that the quality of content is really, really important. And so they were able to build smaller models that performed as well as larger models, and their real know-how was the content curation. I mean, look, these guys are geniuses at actually building large language models from scratch, but then in addition to that, they were really good at curating content from the web. And so if you get high value content and you use that to train a large language model, then you can actually get that large language model to be smaller from a parameter perspective and be as good performance as the larger ones, the larger models who have to take in more data because there's more noise compared to the signal, right? You're trying to overcome all that bad data out there by shoving a bunch of data in to get performance. And so, I mean, garbage out or garbage in, garbage out, holds, and candidly, I think will always hold.
Well, especially if they start taking transcripts from YouTube videos and even if they're using this video, for example, as a training model, 2 + 2 is 5, 2 + 2 is 5.
Yeah.
And that's truth. That's the accurate answer. Just in case they're using this.
This has been if you don't mind me actually jumping in, I mean, this has been a concern in AI for a while. I mean, particularly if you now start getting into corporate security, enterprise security, nation state security, where other bad actors could inject bad data into models to get it to do a specific thing, and you thought you were training a model on good data when it turns out to be bad data, manipulated data.
Right.
And now you're doing bad predictions or bad responses. And so that's actually an attack vector that enterprises need to kind of consider.
Yeah, I mean, if I was in enterprise data security or if I was in national security, I would try to, at this point, I would stay away completely from a lot of this generative AI stuff. But there's probably some value in AI for some decision-making thing. But even then, I don't know if I would trust it completely.
Totally.
Yeah. I wanted to ask another question about the speed at which a lot of these systems have been deployed, because again, it was such a fast, hyped technology, and everyone was jumping on this bandwagon. But before that, if we go back a few years, the big thing was data science, data analytics. It was always like your data scientist is going to be making $300,000 a year. This is there's a lack of data scientists out there. So we saw all of these companies in the enterprise space that went to it was all about data science. And so what I'm wondering is whether all of those companies that did that route, whether they completed these projects in time for the next big thing to happen, and suddenly they're like, oh, we have to do generative AI now. And there is a link, and but it always makes me feel here's my analogy, is like if you put a cake into the oven and someone's like, well, we need the oven to make the cookies now, or we got to put the turkey in, or we're not having Thanksgiving dinner. And then you take the cake out and it's not fully baked. So how many of these data science projects were not fully baked when you saw the jump over to generative AI? And maybe I'm just assuming that there was some. Maybe they all finished the cake.
Yeah, no, I think the data science projects weren't completely done. So I thought data science was like crossing the chasm and starting to really get mainstream adoption. But then Gen AI happened. And I don't think you need to stop those projects, because you're trying to there's different use cases that you're going to use data science and supervised machine learning models for than you would use a large language model for. So an example being maybe fraud at a bank. There's really great machine learning models that you can build to detect fraud. You're not going to use a large language model to detect fraud. And so you should continue to pursue all of the data science projects, years-long data science infrastructure builds if you were building them as a large enterprise. Then you should also start to layer in generative machine learning to open up a bunch of different use cases, because there's use cases that you would not have used the data science platform for. Natural language question answering as an example. It's unlikely that anyone was building a generative question answering model for customer support using their data science platform.
Right.
It's just a different system, but they were using those things to do machine learning on structured numerical data, different types of data and things like that. And the purpose of the data is different. And so like, if you kind of look at when people talked about data previously, it was all about getting the data and then labeling the data to train a supervised machine learning model. Now, getting access to data is not about getting access to enterprise data to label it to train a supervised machine learning model.
Right.
It's getting access to enterprise data to then feed it into an LLM. You don't actually need to label it. You're just actually feeding the raw snippets of text in to an LLM to actually have it generate a response. And so the purposes are different of those two different technologies.
But because the spotlight did change from these machine learning data analytics projects to generative AI, I'm wondering if the ML people or if they start feeling like the middle child, like a Jan Brady type thing, where like you're always giving attention to the new kid or the new Marsha. I'm sorry, Ryan. I'm going to throw pop culture references during this interview. But do you think that they feel like, we've been working so hard on this machine learning project, and now, generative AI is getting all of the spotlight?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And having built generative AI systems for the last 5 years, I'm happy to be in this position where all the ML folks and maybe it's the auto ML folks, which was a popular category for the last several years, are now going, that darn Gen AI guy comes through and is the belle of the ball.
Right.
And I think about what's gonna come next. And so you bring up an important point. And so I answered your question from just like a pure technology and use case perspective. I think you imposed a really important constraint on what I was saying was the people aspect of this, right? And so if you wanted someone to build a fraud model, like that was a smart data scientist building a fraud model, that person may now be more interested in generative AI use cases. And so you don't have them now working on fraud models because they believe their next career move is generative AI, and that's really the growth area. And so I think you imposed a really important constraint on your question was the actual number of people that can actually do these things. So while it's great that supervised machine learning can be applied to different use cases and generative AI can be applied to different use cases, are the data science people now learning generative AI? And I would say yes, because it's cool, it's interesting, and you can do really, really cool stuff with it that you couldn't do previously.
Yeah.
So I think you imposed, as I said, a really important constraint on the question.
So, we have discussed the amount of data that the companies have and whether they're using it for, supervised machine learning or if they're using it for generative AI. Can a company ever feel confident in knowing, that their data is going to be good enough for an AI project? For either one, how do they know? Because again, you can filter and filter and filter, and then maybe the data scientist or whoever you've got working on Gen AI could go, "It's all good now."
Yeah.
Is there a point where they can do that? Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm laughing because like the cleanest data sets that we've ever operated on within an enterprise are still filthy and still inconsistent. I would say again, data for what purpose? There's the data for actually like then labeling it and training a machine learning, supervised machine learning model. And then there's the data that you would want to feed into a generative AI system. And I'll actually like touch on that. That's where I've really seen, that's where I've worked and have the most experience, is we've seen that it's really important to have that data be consistent and up to date, which is hard to actually determine. It helps if you can kind of narrow the use case down. And so an example being maybe I'll bring up customer support again. And so you may have a content management system that you use to expose to your external customers to ask questions about your product and service. That data is managed by someone, head of customer support. It's relatively up to date. It's constrained to a specific topic.
Yeah.
And you should be able to then feed that into an LLM and as a part of a RAG system and have good interactions with that data. As you obviously go larger, say, I'm going to deploy a RAG system across an entire enterprise that has 300,000 employees, and they can ask a question of any data set anywhere in the company. like that's where it gets much harder.
Yeah.
To actually have
that reminded me of a story when I was interviewing this really smart PhD guy who was working for Toyota, and he was working on autonomous vehicles. And now that's super complicated, AI type training. This was way before generative AI stuff. And he got up at a thing where I was talking with him, and he said that his biggest challenge and his biggest problem was that the team members that he was working with, he would always ask them, "Are we ready to go? Are we ready to go? Do you have enough data?" And they're like, "Nope, we never have enough data. There's always more data that needs to be done." And he was getting frustrated with like, well, at what point can I release this autonomous vehicle system to the next level, or at least get it to deployed rather than out of that research space? So I would imagine that in the same way, a lot of data people are like, there's never enough data. You could always use more to make the system, that 0.004 more accurate or whatever.
Yes. So you need to measure the amount of work that it's going to take to actually get those last bits. I mean, as those people always say, "Oh, well, I was able to get to 80%, and I should be able to get to 90% pretty easily." And it's kind of like, what? Getting to 80% was easy.
Yeah.
Getting to 90% is going to be really hard. Getting to 95% is just going to be significantly harder than getting from 80 to 90%. So you just need to kind of weigh what are the benefits of having that extra percent.
Yeah. Does that mean companies have to do a risk assessment for what percentage accuracy will be acceptable within the realms of whatever you're producing? Because you're never going to be 100% accurate, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You need to do that assessment, and you need to, like, we actually go back to the Air Canada case, which I think is interesting to think about from a business perspective, and say, that's just the cost of doing business. Like, I don't know what the payout was to this gentleman. Maybe it was just actually like the bereavement policy being reimbursed or something like that. Right. Maybe plus a little lawyer fees or something like that. Yeah. But hey, that's the cost of doing business. Like, we saved $30 million by servicing our global customers better, and we had to pay this guy $10,000.
Yeah.
Great. Just kind of is what it is.
But then also they had to take the hit of they had to take the bad publicity hit too. But sometimes you don't put dollar amounts on those anyway.
Exactly.
So I've always been the feeling that the speed of development of new large language models and advances in the AI technologies and the tools, I feel like it's been too fast. Has it been? I feel like it's been fast. When you talk to people in the space, has that development been too fast, too slow, or just right for most large businesses that are looking to adopt it? Because there was an interesting thing that you told me before the show was that most businesses are fine with the current speed, or actually it's probably be nice. I don't know. Where do the businesses sit in terms of this development?
As someone that has been in the AI space for a decade now and has built these systems, it was blow your hair back fast. Like in early 2023, like, it was just wild. Like, every new day came with something that you never would have thought before, and just a significant step forward. But I think what that did was that it set us up for success in the future, and specifically, people started to think about, how do I have a plug-and-play system where I can plug in any large language model, and whichever large language model performs best on a certain task, maybe at the lowest cost. And so from an architectural perspective, because the world was moving so fast, people said, oh, well, we need to architect our systems to plug in OpenAI, Cohere, Anthropic, name your large language model to plug in here, which I think was the right architectural decision. But what's also interesting is just how slow, I'll call it, approval for large language models is getting done within an enterprise. And so everyone's kind of racing to build the next great large language model. But from what I'm hearing from enterprise customers, and these are large enterprise customers, over $1 billion in revenue typically, that it takes them about a year to actually get that large language model approved by legal to be used. And so it goes through this long process. And so while we may be on, GPT-5 coming up, people are still operating on GPT 3.5.
Right.
Because it's going to take, a year after GPT-5 is released for it to be approved and then actually put into production. So I think we're moving at the appropriate space, because it kind of drives decision making. I think the appropriate decision making. Yeah. But we're also kind of lagged a little bit just by some of the compliance issues that we see around large language models.
I was asking a bunch of other AI companies whether being LLM agnostic is table stakes now for a company if you're trying to produce an AI tool for a company. That most companies will probably ask to have options for multiple LLMs. And the only example that the guy gave me was, well, if they're so locked into an infrastructure, like if they're so locked into Google, or if they're so locked into Amazon or whatever, like then you'll have to pick what they're using.
Well, I think what's interesting there is you're now seeing those hyperscalers diversify their LLMs. Yeah. And so if you look at Amazon Bedrock, you can access OpenAI, you can access, I think, Cohere or Anthropic, in other models. Yeah. Then you see Microsoft with their OpenAI relationship, then actually broker a deal with Mistral out of Paris. And so you're getting a bunch of large language models there. I'm not as up to speed on the Google access or for
they should
GCP,
but you should just skip Google altogether. That's a little aside from me.
but even the hyperscalers, even with heck, you got Microsoft putting $11 billion into OpenAI, but still having Mistral and other models on their platform. And so it's just interesting how this space is evolving.
I want to bring up another thing that you had mentioned to me before the show, and that was that a lot of companies, I was surprised to hear this, that initially they wanted to build their own LLMs. And now that's not the case, right? Like, because they discovered a lot of problems with trying to do this themselves.
One of the most interesting things I've heard over the last year, I think, was my bet a year ago would have been every Fortune 500 globally is going to have their own proprietary large language model at some point in the next 3 to 5 years. And I think that's why Databricks bought Mosaic ML for $1.3 billion to enable enterprise customers to build those large language models, to get around a lot of the security and compliance concerns that you have with large language models. But then I heard several large enterprises say that they don't want to build their own large language models or even fine tune their own LLMs, because they then believe that they would then become an LLM company.
Okay.
And that's the last thing they want to do, given all the scrutiny that the LLM companies are getting from government.
Right.
And so they've said that they're kind of happy to have OpenAI, Anthropic actually take on the risks of being an LLM company, as opposed to, say I'm an investment bank. I already have scrutiny because I'm an investment bank. I don't want scrutiny because I'm now an LLM company too.
Yeah.
And so I just thought that was a really interesting insight that folks are saying, we'll happily actually punt on this and push it over to the LLM vendors until there's maybe more clarity around, what is the actual risk that they're taking on.
But there's also some issues around content moderation that some of these LLM makers have, where I think you were telling me OpenAI, they have 30 days to review the data. And there's if you're a company and you've got a lot of data that you want to keep secret, that seems like that's like a big red flag. Like, I don't want another company to have access to this data, even if it's for 30 days. So what does a company do in that case, where if they want to protect their data, but they don't want to develop their own LLM?
Yeah, that's exactly the issue that this. So the reason why I thought everyone would build their own LLM was
because of the privacy
that you're bringing up, and so it was so counterintuitive to hear people say that. And so I think what is really great about this is like how the market is evolving so quickly. And so Databricks again wants to build private LLMs for enterprises. If they get that right, then those enterprises won't go to the hyperscalers to access LLMs. And so what the hyperscalers have to do is they now have to work with the enterprises and say, hey, what security and compliance do you want for you to put your data here? And they need to move faster than Databricks, or else Databricks is going to take the market. And so one thing that I've seen consistently in this wave of AI compared to, say, the 2012 to 2022 wave of supervised machine learning is I consistently hear enterprises saying we're being thoughtful. We're really thinking about the space, which is interesting because that implies the last time they weren't thoughtful. They were just kind of running in a bunch of different directions and getting a bunch of stuff wrong.
Right.
But I guess the point that I'm bringing up is that they are a little slower to adopt because they're starting to say, hey, what are the concerns, and they're sticking to their guns on the concerns, and they're not saying I'm going to risk enterprise security or compliance or anything like that. And so they're letting the vendors come to them and add all the requirements that they need. And I think those vendors are moving super quick because it's such a large market.
Okay. A couple of final questions. I brought this up before when we were talking about the creativity aspect of AI, where a hallucination on the creative side might be a good thing. And I've seen a couple of articles that have suggested that hallucinations don't even really matter, and that it can be a good thing. Can you expand on that? Like from what you've seen, do you see a lot of either scientists or other people saying, don't worry about the hallucination, it'll be fine? And again, maybe not talking about the accuracy side of things, but maybe that this can be a good way of. We used to call this in the human side, out of the box thinking. Can you imagine if instead of thinking outside of the box, people were like, well, you're just having a hallucination?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that I kind of think back to now the explainability conversations of several years ago, where you had a lot of luminaries in the field of deep learning, because deep learning is a black box, say, hey, explainability isn't important. I think what everyone has learned as AI gets out into the world is that explainability is pretty important. I want to know where answers are coming from. I want to know why you're making these decisions. And I think we're having that same conversation around hallucinations. And again, it does come down to the use case. Is what am I trying to do here? Am I trying to be creative? And if we kind of draw a parallel to a type of meeting, if you walk into a meeting and it's a brainstorming session, great. We announce that it's a brainstorming session so that we can all start to be creative and just come up with new ideas. But if we walk into like a quarterly planning session, and you're doing brainstorming, or a quarterly review session rather, where you're reviewing the metrics, financial metrics from the previous quarter, like don't brainstorm in this meeting. These are real numbers of whether or not we hit our objectives. And so I think what's unique about humans is the fact that we can kind of turn that on, turn that off, or at least most people can. Whereas with computers, or at least with the large language models rather, we're not really turning them on, turning them off. They're just always there, and so we need to be aware for them.
Is that why there's 3 buttons down at the bottom of your ChatGPT thing, where it's like more accurate, more creative, or balanced, and that's why does there need to be more buttons on that type of system? And
I think they're giving the appropriate amount of buttons, but yes, that is why those buttons are there.
Yeah.
So if you want a more accurate or less hallucination system, like you're going to turn the temperature down to 0. If you want to be more creative, you're going to turn that temperature up. And so this is kind of that like stochastic nature of predicting the next word. You don't want the system to always generate the most probable word to come next. You want it sometimes to choose one that's maybe in the second or third most probable to come, which allows it to generalize across the language and create new and novel text.
Yeah.
But again, it really does come down to the use case. What are you using it for? And so if you're good with hallucinations, those are the kind of brainstorming meetings that we're talking about, or creative sessions to come up with stuff.
Yeah.
If it's a different kind of meeting, then you can't have the hallucinations.
Do you feel like the explainability thing has gotten better from companies or from the AI models than maybe you had before? Because it feels to me like it's when I ask my toddler, why did you steal that cookie? And you get, I don't know, or I don't know why I did what I did. I just wanted the cookie.
Yeah. So from a actual technology perspective, no, it has not gotten better.
Okay.
From an industry perspective, it has gotten better. And 5 years ago, you would have Jeff Hinton, the godfather of deep learning, say that explainability is irrelevant. It doesn't even matter. I think he's totally wrong, with all due respect to a legend.
Yeah.
And at least now, referencing back to an underlying document where the system generated the answer, that's table stakes.
Right.
Like if you don't do that, I'm not going to buy your solution. And so that's at least, explainability is a very big umbrella, of which one of the kind of subcategories is something called provenance. And so in this instance, you're showing the provenance of where the answer was generated from. And so I think we've made progress because vendors now at least concede the point that some form of explainability is absolutely critical. Whereas years ago we didn't. But from a technology perspective, we can't tell you any more than several years ago about why a system's actually generating a response.
Right. So as you look at the future, Ryan, do you feel that the industry will get a handle on hallucinations and reducing them where they need to reduce them, but then also allowing for creativity in certain cases? Is that where we're headed?
Yes. Yeah, it is where we're headed. So I think as people learn how to use these systems, they're going to apply them in appropriate places. And so I think people are getting the intuition for large language models and for probabilistic systems because they've been dealing with deterministic systems for so long.
Right.
And I think what people are starting to realize is that if you have one component of an overall system that is probabilistic or stochastic, then the whole system's stochastic.
Right.
Right. And so now if a whole system is, well, then how do we apply this in the right way? How do we reduce the hallucinations in certain instances, or how do we let them flourish in others, depending on the use cases? And all these reference architectures for different use cases are starting to emerge. and I think we'll get a handle on it and we'll apply them appropriately.
All right, Ryan, I think we're out of time. Again, thanks for joining us on the show today. I think we're going to probably have you back when GPT-5 comes out, and we can laugh at all of the mistakes that's making initially. When
that would be great. Thanks for having me.
All right. If that's all the time we have for today's episode, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, add any comments you have below. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.